Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the City of Casey Council meeting of the 20th of September 2022. My name's Nolene Duff and I'm the Chair of Administrators. I'd like to welcome those members of the community who have joined us in the gallery this afternoon and to those staff who are also attending the meeting. Before we move into the official proceedings this afternoon, we have something that we would like to note, and it was with great sadness that we learned of the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the 8th of September this year. Her Majesty was beloved and respected around the world, and I think we have certainly seen that in the last week since her passing. A great deal has been written and said about her commitment to duty and the dignity with which she served for 70 years. Many in this community would remember fondly when the Queen travelled through Berwick in 1954 as part of her regional tour of Victoria, travelling via the Royal Train back to Melbourne. On behalf of the City of Casey, we offer our condolences to His Majesty King Charles III, the royal family and all those who are mourning the loss of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. We now will observe a minute's silence as a mark of respect, and if you are able to, please stand and join with me in that minute of silence. Thank you. I'd like to start this afternoon with introductions of my panel colleagues. Mr. Cameron Boardman.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone in the gallery and watching.
Mr. Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Our Chief Executive Officer, Glenn Paterson. And we have a number of senior officers here with us this afternoon. Jen Bednar, Director, Customer and Business Transformation. Steve Coldham, Director, Corporate Services. James Collins, Director, City Planning and Infrastructure. And Colette McMahon, Director, Community Life. And we're assisted this afternoon by Jordan on AV and Michelle Tipton, our Head of Corporate Governance, Integrity and Legal Support. I'd like to open the meeting with the Statement of Acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities, and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The Diversity Statement. The City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes, together forming our rich and dynamic community story. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. Now move to item 2, the confirmation of minutes. There are 2 sets of previous minutes to be confirmed this afternoon, and I'll deal with them separately. The first is our special council meeting held on the 31st of May 2022. Is there a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes?
Yes, I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconder, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. All in favour? carried. And the second set of minutes is from the 16th of August 2022. Is there a mover and a seconder?
I'll move those minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
I'll second those.
Mr Belmar, all in favour? Carried. Item 3, declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under Section 130 of the Local Government Act 2020 and have no conflicts relevant to the agenda papers this afternoon. Do my colleague panel members or any officers present have any conflicts to declare?
I have nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman.
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. There's nothing to record in terms of declaration of interests. Item 4 is public question time, and we have 3 public questions this afternoon. Questions 1 and 2, and I'll read them together, and there's a collective response submitted by Viv Payne, and the subject is the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan. And question 1 is, before deciding on the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan, given engine emissions have been declared a silent killer of our brain, quote, by dementia experts, will Council conduct its own air pollution study at the entry to the existing landfill site, extrapolated for the proposed waste transfer facility, to determine if extending the life of the landfill site poses any adverse risk to the long-term health of surrounding residents? Question 2, will administrators acting as Casey Council assure ratepayers there will be no grounds for any future class action against the City of Casey as a consequence of the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan, including but not limited to any aspect of extending the life of the landfill site or from a reduction in property value from the proposed new overlay? So thank you, Ms Payne, for your question in response to issues raised in the Hampton Park Hill Development Plan. And I'm advised by our Manager, Planning and Building, and Council has not considered this matter at this point in time. Council has received detailed submissions in response to the public exhibition of the draft Hampton Hill Development Plan, including submissions on the proposed waste transfer facility, the EPA recommended buffers and the buffer overlay. The draft Hampton Park Hill Development Plan does not propose to extend the life of the active landfill beyond its current approval. Council officers are reviewing the submissions that have been received, and a report will be prepared for a future Council meeting to consider those submissions, along with the overarching state government waste and planning policies that have initiated the need to review the current development plan. So thank you for your question. The final question this afternoon is from Mr Andrew Gainey, and it's with respect to the Warneet Jetty funding advocacy. And Mr Gainey's question is, Warneet jetties are crumbling and have been partially shut for years. State government is stalling things. What is Council doing to support the community? Can Council please write to the candidates for the upcoming state election seeking a clear financial commitment to rebuild the jetties? So our Manager City Design and Construction has advised that the Warneet foreshore, including jetties and boat assets, are managed and maintained by the state government, not by the City of Casey. A Warneet boating precinct plan has been developed as part of the which recommends building a new boat ramp. The Better Boating Victoria website currently indicates that detailed designs are currently being prepared for public release in late 2022. Further detailed information can be found at Better Boating Victoria's website, Boat Ramp Upgrades Warneet Boating Precinct. And in response to the question, can Council advocate on behalf of the community, Council will include the state of the jetty as part of its future advocacy efforts. So thank you, Mr Gainey, for bringing that to Council's attention. We now move on to item 5, officer reports, and there are 8 reports for consideration this afternoon. And the first of those reports is item 5.1, the Wilson Botanic Park Master Plan adoption. And do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar, and a seconder.
Seconder, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Borden. Mr Belmar, I invite you to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight I move the Wilson Park Master Plan adoption. That is a document that's attached to the council papers this evening. Can I commend the work of the officers who have worked on this plan? It's a fantastic plan for a great council facility. I note that the community has been very engaged with this plan and that there's been over 800 visits to Casey Conversation and there's been 17 submissions. I note that this is a facility that requires long-term planning. There's been two previous plans in the past, one in the late 90s and another one in the 2000s. This plan is a long-term plan looking at the development of the park over the next 20 plus years. But in particular, I want to just comment on the sorts of matters that are the recommended short-term projects. They're the ones that really identify the sorts of work that needs to be done in the near term, and then just quickly comment on the longer term ambition. But the sorts of phase one short-term delivery matters such as the upgrade and expand of the main car park, a relocated new visitor centre, the lily pad lake renovation, work on the shed and staff rooms and matters of that like, and also importantly in the modern era, Wi-Fi installation. So we can see that they're the sorts of things that will keep the park up to date and ensure that it's used optimally by the community. But I also want to note that there is a medium term and then long term concepts of the park. And in the medium term, I note that some of the things that have been projected are the introduction of community pavilion and cafe, a kitchen garden, learning pods, and I think two of my favourite proposals in the time I've been here at council, a Hoo Tower sealed access track and a Hoo Tower garden. So it's really looking at the use of the entire park and all the different sectors of the park and ensuring that they can all be used by the community. And then finally, in phase three, the long-term concepts, it's great to see the sorts of thinking that's going into the sorts of aspirations that can be had for a facility such as this, which is a large piece of land very close to the town centre of Berwick. And they are long-term aspirations with projects such as an elevated walkway along tree tops, covered viewing decks, and water gardens. So I commend this work as a long-term vision for an important council asset. I again commend all of those that have worked on it, and it's great to see the long-term vision that is going into planning this council facility. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman?
Chair, I echo Mr Belmar's comments in relation to the quality of the work in this master plan and commend the local community who clearly have acknowledged what a vital and treasured local community asset the Wilson Botanic Park is for the Berwick community and arguably the community beyond its immediate vicinities. I do note that within the master plan there is projections of a cost to council for short to medium term projects of $39 million. The short term projects, particularly over 1 to 10 years, will cost in the order of $22 million. They'll support existing and future visitor experience that Mr Belmar has articulated. And from an administrative perspective, we are very keen to see those specific investments incorporated into future capital works budgets consistent with the master plan, as we see not only the effectiveness of developing master plans and providing clarity over what the council's intentions is, but also providing confidence to the community that we are delivering on our expectations. I do note, as Mr Belmar has also noted on page 74 of the council reports, the 17 submissions that we received during the consultation phase between the 8th and the 29th of July, ranging from that is dealing with expanded car parks, playgrounds, the cafe, multi-use facilities and other issues. And note that council officers have been very vigilant in preparing detailed responses to those aspects raised by the community, that not only we have taken in consideration in the long-term thinking what the community's views are, but we've also been quite forthright that where there has been an issue that perhaps is in slight disagreement with community expectations, particularly around car parking, for example, where I understand there was a trial to have a bus from Federation University to go to Wilson Botanic Park 2 years ago or thereabouts, but the uptake was not as great as expected, that there needs to be those matters of accessibility and enhancing the visitor experience incorporated into the overall thinking. So whilst we thank the community for the enthusiasm and the comprehensive nature of their engagement, we do also note that we have to be quite honest in our feedback and that sometimes matters need to be considered through the long-term overall beneficial lens that this master plan will ultimately provide. So I echo the work of, or the sentiments of Mr Belmar that the work from council officers is exemplary. I thank the members of the community for participating in the consultation, and I look forward to watching the progress of future investments over the ensuing decade.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.2 is proposed changes to the operation of Bellato Road between South Gippsland Highway and Clyde Five Ways Road. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I am moving an amendment to the recommendation as put, and I will move the amendment that appears on the screen now. If I could, the recommendation of 5.2 is that Council notes the proposed closed Bellato Road to through traffic movements between South Gippsland Highway and Clyde Five Ways Road under Schedule 11, Clause 10, brackets 1, brackets A of the Local Government Act 1989 until the sealed road constructions of Bellato Road. 2, notes the proposal to seek approval from the Department of Transport to reduce the posted speed limit from 80 kilometres an hour to 60 kilometres per hour. 3, notifies the Community State Government Transport Agency's emergency services as outlined in the report. 4, the inclusion of a new sub-recommendation 4 notes the revised attachment to these council minutes, which shows the limited access to Bellato Road as a result of the current planning requirements. With the amended resolution as put, I'll move that in standing in my name.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that motion as put.
Thanks, Mr Belmar. Please move to speak to your motion.
Chair, we're going to try and put the proposed road closure location on the screen for those who are viewing online, and for those in the public gallery will be able to see on the screen that immediately is behind me. This is an area of the Cranbourne precinct south of the Casey Fields area, where Bellato Road runs perpendicular to the South Gippsland Highway and Clyde Five Ways Road. The matter that we're dealing with at this evening's meeting is the closure of a small section of the road, as clearly indicated on the map, that abuts Nelson Street. What hopefully community representatives and members can see on the screen is that there is no access to Bellato Road from the existing streets that are clearly indicated as Adrian Street, Nelson Street, Casey Fields Boulevard, Morrison Road and Buena Vista Rise. It is important to note that because part of our decision making in considering this recommendation is that anyone who is travelling from Berwick Cranbourne Road, the access to the north of Bellato Road and the roads that I've just mentioned, do not therefore have a thoroughfare to get to Bellato Road on those streets that are clearly indicated on the map. So whilst we've taken consideration that the inconvenience that this would cause, the reasons for doing it are clearly safety oriented, but are done through because there is a very strong intention from council to upgrade this road in a reasonable period of time. But it is important, Chair, to note that this is not a thoroughfare in a true sense, and whilst we do acknowledge there will be some inconvenience to some residents and businesses within the eschewing area, all considerations around minimising that inconvenience has been taken into consideration. The reason why we are closing this is that there is a requirement for what is currently an unsealed and arguably a dangerous piece of road, which is evidenced because there has been in 2021 4 injury collisions, so road accidents resulting in injuries to the period, or 3-year period, I should say, to 30 December 2021. There has been complaints of the condition of the road insofar as dust that is causing both visual and air pollution to residents, and also the noise that emanates along this particular stretch of roads. But importantly, because it is part of the Caseyfield South Residential Precinct Structure Plan, there has been a delay to the delivering of the drainage and other approvals that are vital infrastructure upgrades parallel to the road itself. We do note that the Victorian Planning Authority is also currently preparing a new PSP for the Caseyfield South precinct, as noted, which will incorporate what the future status of this road is. Whilst Council has gone through an exercise to determine the potential expenditure to upgrade the road, there has been identification which is reasonable in the current circumstances of a shortfall of potential capital investment into the upgrade, and that needs to be considered not just from what the future position on ongoing developer contributions are, but what the future impact to Council's capital works budget for subsequent financial years. So whilst we have a safety issue, we have a condition issue, we have an ongoing maintenance issue, it is a matter that is being considered very thoroughly at this level, but in the interests of community safety, to ensure that we can prevent accidents, that we can deal with the community expectations around the visual and other pollution impacts from this quite dangerous stretch of road. The recommendation today is to temporarily close it and to reduce the speed limits on the ensuing arterials until such time as the drainage works and other infrastructure works associated with the precinct structure plan are completed, that will then allow Council to upgrade the road to a sealed road in the future. In the report, we have identified that could be a number of years away, and we are working through those matters. But after considering all of the issues that have been presented to us on the accessibility, the inconveniences and the other financial and other aspects of this particular matter, it is firmly my opinion that this is the appropriate course of action, one that is a decision we do not in any way take lightly, and we thoroughly have to consider all the facts and other circumstances in this particular situation. But to the avoidance of any further danger or inconvenience to the community, and also to allow for those infrastructure works to be completed that will then allow the road to be completed, this is an appropriate and commensurate course of action. So I trust, Chair, that I have explained our position as thoroughly as I can in the circumstances. It undoubtedly is something that will have impacts to some members of the community and some residents in the immediate vicinity, but we will communicate that as widely as we possibly can. We'll work with those inconvenienced community representatives to educate them on the alternatives and again in our rationale, and we do undertake to monitor progress and to include in future capital works budget the necessary investments to upgrade this road as quickly as possible. With those words, I move the amendment standing in my name.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In seconding this motion, I adopt the comments of Mr Boardman, and I also note that I have read and considered the matters that are set out in the officer's report this evening. I note in particular that the function that we are carrying out in passing this resolution is one that deals specifically with the Road Management Act of 2004, under which Council has responsibility for ensuring that there are maintenance plans for council roads. And in particular, I note that with respect to our unsealed roads within the City of Casey, our council road management plan requires inspection intervals of a maximum of 6 weeks. And at the moment with Ballardo Road, those inspections are being carried out at least weekly. What that tells me with respect to the exercise of the discretion that we have is that something needs to be done, and that I am satisfied, based on the material before me, that it is appropriate that a road closure occur. I note the comments of Mr. Boardman with respect to the fact that there are drainage concerns as to when a road of a more permanent nature can be built, and I also take that into account in coming to the conclusion that it is appropriate to close this road. I also note that there has been communication with the Department of Transport, although as this is a local road, we do not require their authority, but there has been communication and there has been no objection, and the Department of Transport will be actively informed. My aspiration for this road is that in the future a permanent and safe road can be built, but at the moment, as it stands, this is not a safe road, and it is not the sort of road that we want in Casey being regularly used, and therefore it is appropriate that a temporary closure occur. It's not a matter that occurs lightly, and it's certainly one that has tested my thinking as to the appropriateness of it occurring, but there's really only one conclusion you can reach when safety officers are attending on a weekly basis to inspect this road. And on that basis, and the other matters that I've addressed this afternoon, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I also concur. It's a vexed matter, but the report is quite comprehensive in outlining the rationale and the concerns, and also in detailing the funding issues and the other administrative barriers with respect to the work of other authorities in allowing us to proceed with this. So with that, I shall put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3, the Casey Planning Policy Framework rewrite, another very important and comprehensive piece of work. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder?
Second the Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, please speak to the motion.
Thank you, Chair. This evening I'm pleased to move this resolution as it will ensure that the Casey planning scheme is kept up to date and complies with important work that has been done by the state government to ensure that all planning policies are kept up to date. In particular, I note that what I'm introducing builds on a previous amendment to planning schemes, which sought to introduce a new planning policy framework, enabling the introduction of municipal planning strategies, and also the introduction of new state, regional and local integrated policy structures. In particular, I want to draw the community's attention to the draft explanatory report that is attached to the papers tonight. That's an important statutory document which sets out the reasons as to why this proposal is being brought to Council. I want to note also in particular that the work that is being done intends to write and rewrite and review sections of the Casey planning scheme, being the policy frameworks and the strategy, but is not intending to in any substantive way make changes to zones, zone schedules or overlays other than two which are identified in the papers, and that is Clause 4201, the environmental significance overlay, there being some minor changes to those, and also some changes to the heritage overlay. I consider this an important opportunity for Council to update its policies to ensure that all its policies with respect to its municipal statement and its planning policies address matters such as those set out in previous ministerial directions, which required councils to consider how our policy documents, how our planning documents responded to the Metropolitan Planning Strategy Plan Melbourne 2017 to 2050, which is one of the fundamental planning documents for Melbourne and the growth of Melbourne. And seeing as we are in Casey really at the forefront of growth in or one of the municipalities that is at the forefront of growth in the City of Melbourne, it is important and vital to ensure that our policies are up to date and responding to strategic government documents. So with those comments and noting that what we are moving this evening, as it sets out in the notice paper, is the preparation of documents and a request to the Minister for Planning to authorise preparation and exhibition. I am happy to move this motion, and I want to thank the officers who have been involved in this work. It's an important work which sets the strategy for our community with respect to its planning scheme for years into the future, and I'm happy to move this motion on that basis.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank Mr Belmar for his comments. We could, as Mr Belmar has stated, talk with some significant detail around the proposed recommendation and the changes to the policy, and also the actual Casey planning scheme, albeit that a lot of the changes, if not all of them, are relatively cosmetic and have been required not just through regulatory change that Mr Belmar has articulated, but through Amendment C148 as part of the Smart Planning Program that the Victorian Government introduced in July 2018. I am going to talk a little bit about Amendment 148. It is important as the primary reference material when we have undertaken this particular work. But before I do that, Chair, I do note that this is only the first step in what will be a significant process. We are seeking consent from the Minister for Planning to begin an exhibition phase of the framework and the proposed planning scheme, which will be for a minimum of 6 weeks, and also for any comments, feedback, further referral of the scheme itself to appropriate bodies before it comes back to us for finalisation, further consideration at this end, and then finalisation. So there is a long pathway to go, and as I have noted through our internal deliberations, there is a state election on the 26th of November. The likelihood of the Minister for Planning, albeit that there has been undertakings from DELP to affect this as best as possible, but to, as I said, the likelihood for the Minister for Planning to consider this framework, and undoubtedly the frameworks of all municipalities around the state, and to go through a public exhibition phase consistent with the requirements under C148 is optimistic, albeit not impossible, but we do want to work as constructively and as proactively as we can with DELP and the state government overall to ensure that we comply with our obligations on an exhibition phase, but also we do incorporate any feedbacks from relevant government authorities as necessary. I wanted, as I said, just take a little bit of time and a short period of time to talk about 148 and why it is important to this process, because it did introduce the concepts around the principles of a modern planning scheme, which underline the requirements for council to be digital first, insofar as having a more optimised process for planning information, to be user focused, to be consistent, proportional, have the avoidance of conflict and overlap with other interlocking regulatory regimes on prospective land uses, and most importantly is to be policy and outcome focused. And that's what we're dealing with this afternoon, to provide consistency and to quote the requirements under 148 to ensure the controls have a clear policy basis and are planning outcomes driven. And this is a critical structural document from the state government, which will inform all municipal planning strategies and all planning policy frameworks, incorporating local character and other considerations, but to remove any issues of duplication, confusion, and to provide clarity to both the developer community and residents alike. There are particular provisions within C148 which relate to clause 5228 in relation to gaming, which have been specified in the attachment. It does provide guidance on the location of gaming venues and the application requirements for any future planning applications under this clause, and also clause 53.10 on the public open space contribution and subdivisions, which changes and correct the anomalies and errors associated with schedule rates for subdivision involving existing dwellings in the Fountain Gate, Narre Warren CBD area. As Mr Belmar has articulated, the zone schedules remain unchanged. The overlay schedules largely remain unchanged. There are 3 proposed overlay schedules, which I won't repeat, the changes, I should say, that Mr Belmar has described. But we also do want to note that in the clause 7208, we are proposing that a list of guiding principal documents are introduced as background to assist with the interpretation and the application and consistency of the overall documents, or the overall framework, I should say, which have been listed on page 92 and 93 of the council papers. And whilst we do specify that these are complementary documents, they are there to provide further clarification in addition to the schedules, rather than being dictatorial or being overtly prescriptive. So with those words, Chair, I do state again, this is the first part in what will potentially be a longer term process, and that we are very much invested to working with the community and all of our stakeholders, and particularly council officers, to ensure that we do achieve the best possible result for the KC community, taking consideration all of our requirements at every level, and further ensuring that we meet our legislative and regulatory obligations consistent with Amendment 148. So with those words, I'm pleased to second the resolution as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and thank you both for your comprehensive appraisal. I'd also like to pass on my appreciation to the staff that have been involved in doing this work, and whilst it might seem a fairly simple and administrative exercise, I do note that they've cut the local content of the scheme by 50% from, I think it's 35,000 word count to 17,000 word count. So that's a lot of words that have been cut out, and so hopefully that does make the scheme much more accessible for people that are using it. With that, I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.4 is the Community Emergency Resilience Plan 2017 to 2021. Do I have a mover for the report?
Chair, I'll move the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman?
Chair, I'm not going to speak to any great length of this recommendation to revoke the Community Emergency Resilience Plan 2017-2021. It is a hygiene-related matter as part of our ongoing evaluation of applicable policies and other governance documents. It has been decided that in conjunction with the Document Lifestyle Framework that we have adopted, that this particular plan is no longer fit for purpose and has been either incorporated into other strategic council documents such as the Health and Wellbeing Strategy, or that there has been, in this case, the end of the document life cycle. It is a plan that has now been circumvented by the Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committee and their requirements. That's where authority for this particular plan now sits. It is consistent with changes to the Emergency Management Act 2013, which no longer requires sub-plans as this to be developed. So it is, as I said, a hygiene and a process improvement and process monitoring requirement. It is something that we continue from a ongoing and periodic basis to ensure that we do have fit-for-purpose policies and strategies. We're not overlaying or being openly prescriptive or duplicative. And in the circumstances, the recommendation to rescind this plan is completely reasonable and appropriate.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Anything to add, Mr Belmar?
No, Chair, I adopt the comments of Mr Boardman and note and thank council officers for their continual review of our policies and ensuring that our policies are kept up to date, and only those that are required in force at any one time. And with those comments, I'm happy to endorse the motion.
Put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.5 is the Cardinia Creek Regional Parklands Future Directions Plan 2022. Do I have a mover for the report?
Yes, I am happy to move that, Chair, with an amendment which is now appearing on screen. And what I might do is, in moving it, well, I will move it. I can read it before you call for a seconder, or
Perhaps just read the change in the first item.
so in item 1 it now reads that Council 1 provides in principle endorsement of the updated Cardinia Creek Regional Parklands Future Directions Plan 2022, dated 19 September 2022, prepared by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and that the updated plan be included as an attachment to these council minutes.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Chair, I'm pleased to second the amended resolution as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And we do note that the updated plan was provided to council officers, as I understand it, yesterday. So that is thus the amended recommendation. So please speak to the amended motion, Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank council officers for providing a summary of what the amendments contain. In moving this motion and the comments I'm making this evening, I continue to support Council's endorsement of the plan because it's an important piece of work that recognises a parkland of 508 hectares in size that weaves along the Cardinia Creek and extends across from the Harkaway foothills to the plains of the old Cooey-Rup swamp. And the lands and water of the Cardinia Regional Parklands are part of the traditional country of the Bunurong. And I note that it's an important piece of work that identifies a waterway that crosses municipal boundaries and seeks to provide a long-term vision to how it is used and planned for in the future. I note in particular that in the past, Council has adopted a number of policies and has a strategic policy context for this sort of plan. And I note that set out in the Council papers this evening are a number of previous policy context plans that have been adopted over the time. And I want to make particular note of the equestrian strategy of Casey and note also the Cardinia Creek South Precinct Structure Plan from the Victorian Planning Authority. So in many respects, this is a plan which brings home work that has been done over years by this council, by council officers who have seen the potential for this type of park to be developed, and this plan can bring that to fruition. I note also, in particular, that there's been community engagement, that there's been online surveys with the state government's Engage Victoria website, which received 35 responses. And I note that also that the key points that were raised in the feedback related to protecting biodiversity values, celebrating cultural heritage and Bunurong values, enhancing safety, in particular in prioritising high-risk road connections and supporting a diversity of users and parkland users among other matters that were raised. But really, in closing, I want to reflect on the fact that work such as this demonstrates positive long-term thinking about sensitive waterways, about how they can be used appropriately as parkland and protected for the long term, and also importantly that in protecting and recognising a waterway, it identifies and pays respects to the traditional owners and the values that they had for these important waterways. And I want to thank them for the involvement that the local community, Bunurong community, has had in putting this plan together. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. Beyond the exceptional vision that is encapsulated in the Future Directions Plan. I would also like to acknowledge that this is an excellent example of stakeholder engagement and consultation, not just with the community who have raised some significant issues as a consequence of the 2,400 or in excess of 2,400 letters that were directly sent to affected landowners, but also the drop-in events that were held at Managum Park, Akuna Park and the Cardinia Creek Regional Park, evening online community information session, and surveys that were coordinated with the State Government's Engage Victoria website. But I think if we just look at the cover of the plan itself and see that the Boonwurrung Land Council Aboriginal Corporation, the Cardinia Shire, DELP, Melbourne Water Parks Victoria, all of which have signed off on the plan and its directions, its contents, and its statement of the future. That this is, as I said, an example of different organisations with a common purpose working together to provide a long-term community vision, which undoubtedly will reap significant benefits. We do note that whilst we have received a response from the state government, this initial plan was funded through the Suburban Parks program, and the costs associated with developing the plan and the various engagements which I have referenced were fully funded through that program, and it appears that program has met its funding commitments and may be reinvigorated in a different format following the state election. From our perspective, it remains a significant priority, as articulated in Resolution point 2 on the screen, that to ensure that we do achieve the requirements and the activities listed in the Future Directions Plan, that we do continue to advocate to the state government for funding allocations to see that the plan's realisation actually does occur. And as Mr Belmo has articulated, is that there are a number of initiatives contained within the action plan which undoubtedly will have significant community and other amenity benefits in the future, and the only way that such will be achieved through the advocacy to the state government and by us working in conjunction with the stakeholders on an ongoing basis to ensure that we do have that advocacy at scale and through a consistent lens. So I also acknowledge all stakeholders and parties that were involved in the development of this plan and the significant engagement from the community to provide feedback which ranged from protecting biodiversity values, celebrating cultural heritage, enhancing safety, supporting diversity of users and parkland participants, and improving facilities and other landscape elements, to not mention all of them extensively, but many issues which were raised which have been incorporated into the final plan. So if we do have a template now that we can be very proud of, which is broader than simple municipal boundaries and has a much wider stakeholder cohort as part of its overall development, this is certainly an example of that. And I commend all of the stakeholders involved for their contribution to something which will be a long-term valuable community asset.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.6, Casey Fields Master Plan Administrative Update. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman?
Chair, I'm going to move directly to page 64 and 65 of the Master Plan Update, which is on page 236 of the Council papers. The visual depiction of the concept plan is far more informative and illustrative than the information. It really sums up what the future vision for Casey Fields is, and over the ensuing 20-year period, if all of these developments are realised and they are completed, as certainly we are optimistic will be the case, there is no doubt that Casey Fields, if it is not already, will transform into one of the state's premier sporting and recreational destinations, and probably even be an exemplar nationally. It would be very difficult anywhere else in Victoria, let alone the entire country, to find a piece of community infrastructure which incorporates municipal tennis facilities, a future or a current regional AFL stadium that potentially will be expanded to have a much broader application, a regional athletics stadium, a district cricket and netball stadium, the regional soccer training fields and the potential regional soccer stadium for maybe even A-League games, a netball facility to ensure that the Casey Demons netball team is incorporated on a regional basis, that there is a velodrome, there is a cycling precinct and regional cricket and regional rugby league, not just incorporating the community amenities and other facilities that are in the overall concept plan, but also other hospitality and commercial developments which might ensue as part of the overall development. When Casey Fields was first promoted as an opportunity, there were many cynics that thought that it was largesse, that it was perhaps overly optimistic. And I do note that my very good friends, the Coodaveen Champions that appear on 3MP, 4 p.m. every Friday, they had a parody song, to Sting's Field of Gold. They actually sang a song about the fields of Casey, that no one knew where it was, and it was sort of more conceptual rather than realistic than anything else. But that was many years ago, and I think we can say that a decade later, from when the fields of Casey became part of community lexion, that the cementing of the Cranbourne Football Netball Club, in addition to the Melbourne City Football Club and other anchor tenants, including the former Springvale VFA side, that are now the Casey Demons, and also that the AFLW Melbourne football team plays regularly down there, that this has really become a point of regional sporting excellence at a very high level that undoubtedly is going to serve the community and ongoing sporting competitions well into the future. And it's pleasing that we do get updates of this nature that not only incorporates the elite level requirements of Casey itself, but takes into consideration the community expectations on all of those other regional and recreational facilities which are so clearly articulated in the master plan. So it is extremely pleasing to see the site now come into fruition. The vision is being realised, and with future investment and leadership at this end, and also at those who are the tenants and the advocates and the promoters of the precinct overall, there is no doubt in my mind that in 20 years post, all of the aspects contained within the master plan will be fully realised. With those comments, Chair, I just want to make a further plug, if I could, that we are holding a citizenship ceremony on the 9th of October at Casey Fields, which is a prelude to the AFLW Round 7 match that you'll be very pleased, Chair, to know, that's between Melbourne and the West Coast Bulldogs. And I will be officiating at that citizenship ceremony. It's not only going to be a unique opportunity to welcome new citizens to Casey, but it does go to the point that I've just been making, is that we have this exemplary world-class facility that is a multi-purpose and multi-used venue, and if we create a degree of community excitement around citizenship ceremonies and get new citizens actively interested in what Casey Fields and the vision actually is, then we are going a long way to furthering the vision ourselves. So I just leave that advertorial as part of my comments, commend those involved in the development of Casey Fields, certainly congratulate those who ongoing investments and particularly the anchor tenants, and look forward to visiting the facility very soon again on the 9th of October.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman, and thank you for exposing us to the diversity of your cultural and sporting interests as well. Move to the seconder, Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I note on reading the plan and the history and the background of Casey Fields that it has a connection to a visit by a former CEO of Casey going to Cardinia Park and considering what was on offer at Cardinia Park, which is a a district facility which provides for netball and cricket and football and the Geelong Cats as well, and I think also swimming pools, and considering where in Casey there might be the opportunity to create a large sporting facility. And Casey Fields is what comes from that vision, from that visit. And I note, just from the comments of Mr. Boardman, the offerings at Casey Fields are intended to be incredibly broad. They intend to cover cricket, football, soccer, netball. But I also note, in particular, for the purposes of discussing the master plan this evening, that the vision also includes an informal open space network, and it's important to consider that the facilities that are proposed at Casey Fields in the long term are not just for elite level sports, but they're also for active recreation by members of the community who want to use the facilities for their family and for their own open space fitness. And I note, for example, the discussion in the papers with respect to a regional play space and village green, a fitness trail, a linear park, a dog-friendly space, and the facilities of a like nature, which will ensure that visitors to Casey Fields need not put on the boots and have a run on a field to be able to enjoy it, but can go there and simply enjoy the space and a council facility which is world-class, not only for elite sport but also world-class for passive and active recreation. Finally, I want to commend the work that's been done by council officers on this long-term vision for Casey Fields. I note that in the papers it provides information as to the fact that this piece of land had been on the market for many months before this council saw an opportunity, and certainly from that time, coming now on more than 20 years ago, the vision is being fulfilled. There is still time to go, but certainly the work that we see in a document like the one we are adopting tonight shows that only a positive future is in hand for Casey Fields. And finally, I just want to comment that very recently, on my listening to the Could Have Beens, they've updated their song, and it's now a much more positive reflection on Casey Fields. So good on them, and with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar, and thank you to both of you for the comprehensive appraisal of the benefits that Casey Fields offers this community and the broader community. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.7, the disposal of 70 Volk Road, Cranbourne West. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I will be very brief in my comments about this motion this evening. As can be seen from the papers, this motion commences statutory process for the disposal of this piece of land. I've considered the papers, I've considered the process that Council intends to undertake, which includes advertising by public notice, considering submissions and receiving a further report after that has occurred. Having looked at the property plan and the documents that are attached to the papers this evening, I'm happy to move this motion and for Council to commence the process of the disposal of this parcel of land in Cranbourne West.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, anything to add?
Chair, I'm equally satisfied with the undertakings and process, and pleased to second the recommendations as put.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. 5.8 is the 2021-22 budget outcome financial statements and performance statements. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Chair, I will move the recommendations as put.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Seconder?
Yes, I'll second those.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, you've been very involved in this as the representative on our audit committee, so I invite you to speak to the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's perhaps not clear to the community the extensiveness of the considerations of what is one of our most fundamental tasks of managing the finances, not just consistent with all of our policies and best practice requirements by virtue of our positions, but also in the community's best interests. And there is quite a significant amount of, if I can say, behind-the-scenes analysis and evaluations of the performance statements and the financial statements, notwithstanding for the first year, the involvement of the Victorian Auditor General's Office, or VAGO for short, as our external auditors. And also, what we do need to note, Chair, is during the preparation of the final financial statements, the outcome and the performance statements, we did go through a CFO recruitment rather unexpectedly, but as we have acknowledged, we do very much welcome Simone Wicks to the organisation and commend Simone and her team, and particularly Charles Nagana, for acting in the CFO's position during this process, which is quite frankly one of the most fundamental aspects of not just their roles but the council overall. So thank you very much to Simone and to Charles. From an Audit and Risk Committee perspective, we have held 3 meetings in very quick succession to consider the statements, the performance statements and the budget outcome, and also to consider the feedback from the Auditor General's Office by virtue of their closing report and also their final management letter. And I'm going to touch on those in a moment. And whilst they are confidential documents, understandably, because of potential sensitivities to the operating position of the organisation, I do want to be as transparent as I can, because it is an important part of the governance and consideration of my role as a member of the Audit and Risk Committee, but also to all members, and to give you confidence, Chair, and Mr Belmar confidence that we have been vigilant and comprehensive in our evaluation. I do want to prefix my comments that although we have achieved a budget surplus of $2 million, which is indicated in recommendation 3, there are some significant economic headwinds which we will be subject to in this and forthcoming financial years. It's no secret that there are significant national and state budgetary pressures which are not just impacted by the Reserve Bank's monetary policies to consider successive raising of interest rates, but also we need to be cognizant of the relevant CPI figures and the underlying inflationary pressures that's impacting on the overall economy. That's going to cause 2 things. One is that there will undoubtedly be an impact on final consumer demand, which will have a subsequent correlatory impact on valuations of all of our asset base, which need to be considered from a future asset management and long-term financial planning basis. But we're also doing this through what I would consider it, and I've made this point previously, a constrained revenue environment by virtue of the rate cap. And we can understand the policy parameters of having a rate cap consistent across all municipal bases, and I'm certainly not taking this position to advocate for any change in that at this stage, but considering some of the environmental and circumstantial environmental challenges that this organisation and all municipalities will be confronted with at a state and national basis, there has to be further consideration to whether or not that is an appropriate way of monitoring council's revenue raising capacities into the future. And I think that is a sensible thing to say. It is not one that I want to give any disconcerting statement to the community that I will be pushing or advocating for any revisions in any direction. But we need to be very cognizant that in this rising interest rate environment, high inflation environment, low consumer confidence, low investment environment, potential re-evaluation of all our assets base, that there will be undoubtedly significant and ongoing financial pressures by virtue of contract readjustments, labour force readjustments, supply chain readjustments, all of which potentially may be deleterious to the council's financial position in the future. So we are very cognizant that we have a role to not only ensure that we are providing good financial governance and management of all of our operations, but we are doing it taking into consideration all of those issues, and they are very important statements to make. I do want to talk specifically in relation to the VAGO's position from the closing report and also their final management letter. They did raise 7 issues with us, and noting that this is the first time we've had VAGO as our external auditor, and I certainly pay a sincere acknowledgement to Travis Derricott and his team. They are equally operating in a constrained resource environment, and so whilst we would have preferred to have had feedback as part of this process earlier in the process than we did, the flexibility of my co-members of the Audit and Risk Committee, John Ewen as chair, Carol Pagnon and Ernest Stabic, was such that we did meet after hours at successive days to ensure that we could completely consider not just what the Auditor General's findings were, but the management response, which is a vital part of this process. The 7 issues which were raised were very procedural and, in my opinion, potentially minor process-related issues. There is nothing that I would consider in any way of a substantive or significant basis. There was, in one instance, it was quite clearly a coding software error in one of our journal entries, which was corrected by virtue of self-correction through final appropriation and estimates of that particular coding of what was a non-current asset, to some procedural matters which as part of any large organisation would be picked up through this type of process, and undoubtedly it is a healthy part of the process that they have been brought to our attention and that management so expediently and appropriately have responded and corrected commensurate to signing off on the final management letter. To have an organisation which has revenue in excess of $600 million and the employee base that we do, to only have 7 relatively minor issues identified and reported back through a very vigilant accountability process, not just through VAGO but through the Audit and Risk Committee, is really a significant vote of confidence in the management practices of the organisation overall. And I think if there's one thing, Chair, that we can be very proud of as administrators, and paying testament to the executive leadership team around the table, that we have invested significantly in our government processes and our financial management administration to ensure that any of those issues which unfortunately do afflict other municipalities are addressed, are dealt with through improved reporting, transparency and responsiveness by the integrity bodies that we have internally and externally, and that where there is issues that need to be addressed and responded to, we do that in a forthright and transparent manner, and that's exactly what has happened in this particular circumstance. Whilst the associate reports are comprehensive and significant in nature, down to looking at specific line items of revenue and expenditure, it will probably be a small few sectors of the community that will actually read them. I can say that I have. It's not just something that I do as part of my duties, but it is good practice for us to ensure that what is being presented as the overall management reports are being backed up by the data and the comprehensive nature of the performance and the financial statements as a whole. And I am very satisfied that what is presented in summary format absolutely reflects the comprehensive nature of the documents overall. So I don't want to spend any more time going into the specific results. They speak for themselves, but I do want to give yourself, Chair, and Mr Belmar and members of the community confidence of the vigilance and the comprehensive nature that we have undertaken to respond to the independent auditors' assessments, and also to ensure that what has been presented to us and subsequently presented to the community is valid and accurate in the circumstances. And with the comments that I have made, I am completely confident and very proud to move the recommendations that put, including the statements around capital works, which are procedural and understandable in the circumstances, to ensure that we are meeting our obligations from a fiscal, a governance and a good process basis. So those comments, I'll move the recommendations as put.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make some brief comments in seconding this motion this evening. Firstly, I want to thank Mr Boardman for his work on the Audit and Risk Committee, and recognise also the work of the other members of that committee. I also want to thank members of the finance team who have worked in putting together these documents that we're considering this evening, and in particular thank Ms Wicks and also Bernard Rowan, who worked for Council during the life of this financial year. I am satisfied on reviewing the documents that all the comments that have been made by Mr Boardman are absolutely apposite. This is a well-run business which has properly responded to the challenges of the last couple of years. I note in particular, happily note in particular, that the item that refers to rate and arrears in the papers shows that that is one item which, through the careful work and planning of Council and through the careful work of us as administrators over difficult times, that amount is reflecting efforts which show that recovery is continuing to occur. So with those comments, I'm happy to second this motion, other than one final observation, which is that related to the MAV work care scheme. And I note that due to legal requirements, that is a scheme which has a tail, and that over time there may be a requirement to both contribute or receive from that scheme related to the work done by actuaries as to the ongoing liability of that scheme. But again, that shows the careful planning of Council in ensuring that it's able to meet those liabilities over time. And with those comments, and again thanking Mr Borden for his work on the Audit and Risk Committee, I'm happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar, and I too would like to pass on my appreciation to the staff that have been involved throughout the year in managing the financial side of the organisation, and to you in the leadership role you've played on behalf of the panel with the Audit Committee. There are challenges ahead, there is no doubt, as you've outlined, and we need to carefully consider the sustainability of our financial position into the future, which you've alluded to. So that remains always on the table. With that, I shall seek support for the motion. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. That concludes the officer reports for this afternoon. So I'll move to item 6, consideration of reports of committees. And as you've referenced, we note the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee of the 30th of August and the 6th and 7th of September be listed and noted, as well as the record of discussion listed in the agenda papers. Item 7 is petitions, and there were no petitions received for the council meeting this afternoon. Item 8 is urgent business. There is none. Item 9, closed council, matters to be considered in confidential session. There are none. And so that leaves me to close the meeting and thank everybody for being involved this afternoon. But before I do close, a bit of an advertorial, and that is that it's been some 2 years since we undertook our largest community engagement program, Shape Your City, to inform Council's long-term community vision, our council plan and our long-term financial plan. So we're midway through the current council term, and we were referencing that earlier in our discussions today. So there's a process that's underway to check in with the community to ensure that the priorities that were outlined through that Shape Your City process are still valid 2 years down the track. So I encourage people that are listening this afternoon to visit Casey Conversations, which is our online engagement portal. Highlight your priorities through the user-friendly and interactive participatory budgeting tool, and the survey between now and the end of October. And you may also want to come in and talk. There are a number of pop-up dates that are being held. I think there are some 6 across the municipality. So please attend those and use them as an opportunity to give us your feedback and your ideas for the future vision. So with that, I declare the council meeting closed and thank everyone for their participation this afternoon. I bid you good afternoon.